Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to another installment of Client Side Chats. All our guests are very special. Definitely this one is, and that is Dan Hopwood. So, hey, Dan, welcome to Client Side Chats. How are you doing?
Good, James. How are you? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I know it's been quite some time that we've been having here this year in 2020, but I'm really happy to say that you're one of our first guests to ask the question that we're changing our theme to, and that is safety success stories. So, essentially, Dan, if you don't mind, we wouldn't mind chatting with you about a success you've had in safety today. What was it? What is it? How did you define success? How did you get there? What would you
Sure.
say?
Well, it's a big question. It's a big question
Very.
from a couple of perspectives. The kind of jobs I've had in my career, it's a big question relative to how I have deployed sort of, what we do as safety professionals. So having given that a little bit of thought, let me tackle one that was relevant to my time as a safety and risk management director of an organization.
Ah,
And part of the reason that I ended up working with this company was that their frequency of injuries was sort of, in their words, kind of off the charts. It was a complex business because it had some union, some non-union, and it had almost every trade you can think of. Had a seasonal element to it. At the peak, almost 2,000 employees, about 1,700.
wow.
But one of the measurements that told us that they were struggling when I joined was their experience modification for work comp was over 200.
Ooh,
So if 100 is average, they were double that plus some, right?
yeah.
And, well, there's always some low hanging fruit. There's no question that there were little things we could do to make a difference. Some of those were claims management, working with the insurance company, that kind of thing. All that started to, and I was with these folks for 5 years. And so I had the opportunity to deploy some things and then see how it manifested over time. So if we think about this one and we think about the experience mod being the measurement we looked at, and in California at that point, the measurement included the number of claims of a certain type and how much they cost relative to your class codes in comparison to the rest of the industry, right?
Hmm.
So let's start with that this organization was over 200. So they were twice the average in terms of their experience modification. So the organization was paying a lot for insurance. And so my challenge was pretty easy: make it go away, make
Yeah.
it change, right? Drive it down.
Yeah.
And so that's what we focused on. And just in thinking about it, I made some notes. But the one thing that I started with was with the management team, not the executives, because they got it. They were writing the checks. But the management team didn't see day to day the implication because their jobs really hadn't changed. Nothing they were doing was changing. So my job then was to collaborate, to engage, and to incorporate them into one, understanding what was going on and why it was so critical and what the economic uh, sort of dynamics were for the organization. And then to say, and to find a way how I could incorporate them in the fix. I think they were used to somebody kind of flying in from the outside in the department saying, "This is what you got to do."
Right.
That's the low hanging fruit. That would work for a while. It wouldn't work
Right.
for a long period of time. So we did three things. I sort of pushed three things, and thankfully the organization thought it was meaningful, and we did it. First, the management team had to be involved. They had to be engaged. They couldn't
Yeah.
be silent partners in how we made things better. Secondarily, we had to identify um, how we were going to respond to lagging indicators because we had to figure out what we needed to fix. But the other was we agreed on some leading indicators, and some of those were we're going to do more training. We're going to do a better job at responding to the things that showed up in incident investigations that
Hmm.
needed to get fixed, and track those. How did we track them?
Hmm.
Um, and the other was, and I think the shining star of the whole thing was, it wasn't really an incentive program, but it was a recognition program that recognized employees for doing two things. coming up with ideas to make things safer,
Hmm.
and two, being a member and a part of the safety activity.
Hmm.
So we started with the management team, got them on board, they understood. We changed how we responded to lagging indicators, and we started incorporating more and more leading indicators. And then the third part of that was I stood in front of 1,700 employees
Uh-huh.
and said, "You each are now a safety director. I have to have your cooperation. I need you to be engaged because we're just at that place where we have to make a difference."
Wow.
Good response. They kind of really liked it. And so what we did was we began this thing where every week people could turn in ideas. They could turn in every week. The organization gave a line item budget to this thing. And so we had a committee who would review recommendations, suggestions, and things that employees had submitted to make the safety program better. And it was scaled. If you
Yeah.
gave us a little something, it might be $25. But if it was something on this end that somehow made a great big impact to the insurance program and the costs and compliance with regulations and that sort of thing, it could be as much as 500. And it was things in between. So the committee's job was to be fair. And we had a rubric. We knew how to measure these things, right? It wasn't,
Hmm.
I like Johnny, so he gets something. When we started this, James, the intriguing part of this was that we really got some garbage. People
Mm.
thought if they turned in a piece of paper, they would get recognized.
Gotcha.
My job, and I took this on, was to go back to them and say, "Thank you for participating. You're not going to get recognized, and here's why. Now, I want you to continue to participate, but I want you to change how you do this. Be more thoughtful, be more rigorous in your analysis, give us something we can really measure." And so what happened over the course of months was we went from getting some stuff we could not act on. I called it
Hmm.
garbage a minute ago, and some of it was, but we really couldn't act on it. To by the time this program was sort of fully developed, we were getting diagrams, pictures, regulatory references. People were doing research and bringing in what other organizations had done. And so in
Wow.
the end, what we found was we exhausted almost all of the line item budget, but we made a point of recognizing the individuals who had participated in front of everybody else.
Yeah.
Everybody got to see it. And all that did was stimulate more interest. How did that play out over time? So if I told you when I went in that the experience mod was over 200, it was well over 200. It
Right.
was on its way to 3.
Yeah.
By the time I left that organization 5 years later, I had 3 in California. Well, all the experience mods work the same, but you incorporate 3 years worth of history. And by the time I left, that experience mod had gone to just under 100, and they had
Wow.
cut their insurance premiums by about 70%.
Wow.
Partly because of market dynamics, right? I can't take credit for that. But
Yeah.
what we can as a management team say is that communication, honesty, transparency, collaboration, focusing on I'd like to say we focused on the basics. It was not complex.
Yeah.
It was not super complex. We had to do some complex safety stuff. We had to fix guards on machines. We had to make vehicle incidents get less. We
Yeah.
had to make sure people were riding their forklifts properly and using heavy equipment right. There were all kinds of things we had to tackle. But the essence was those people knew their jobs.
Yeah.
We didn't have to do a ton of retraining.
Yeah.
We had to find a way to convince them that what they did was meaningful and important. Their life and their safety was more important than anything else. And we needed them to be part of the team.
Yeah.
And we succeeded with that. And I don't think it was because what we did was magic. It was good, solid safety work. We rolled up our sleeves, we sweated a little bit, and somehow it worked out. Thankfully, we had a management team that was totally on board. There
Yeah.
wasn't tons of time we had to spend convincing them. They were writing big checks. They didn't want to write big checks anymore.
Yeah.
So
That makes a
they were
lot of
willing. They were
sense.
willing to invest, and I think that uh, the risk manager that replaced me was my second in command.
Hmm.
So I had 5 years worth of time to help train her up in this profession and what we do. Um, let's see, 13 years later, is it 13? 13 or 14 years later, she's still there. She's still
Oh, wow.
succeeding, still doing the same thing.
That's
So
great.
yeah, and I count that as a success too. That that person has been successful for so long.
Yeah, and you know what? I tell you, that's great, but all from the foundational thing, all of the engagement that you're talking about and getting people empowered to be able to do this and seeing a lot of satisfaction from it, which I think is great to be able to do. And Dan, you and
Part
I
of
have
that,
known each other for, well,
yeah.
go
I
ahead. I'm sorry,
was
Dan.
going to say part of that empowerment. And I apologize for interrupting. Was that um, I made sure they understood my door was wide open. I
Yeah.
think before there was a little bit of a barrier.
Yep.
My door stayed open. Anybody could come in. Anybody could talk about anything. My caveat to the folks was, I will be honest with you. I will tell you if I think you're giving me something that is not really built out, not thoughtful, that you're just trying to kind of slip in. And I didn't
Yeah.
have to have a lot of those conversations. I had a few, but word got out. If you're going to bring something to the risk management department and the safety guy, give it a little bit of thought. He wants to participate. He wants to be engaged. And I say me, it really was the management team. It was a
Yeah.
great team effort.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, I was going to say you and I have known each other for many years, especially through the our work together at the ASSP.
Right,
And
right.
I know one thing about you is that you're very big about recognition, especially for people who are really doing the job and doing a very good job of engaging folks and everything. But you're with Sompo International now. So what is it that you do with Sompo?
Well, I'm the Western Region Vice President. And so our country, in terms of our risk control function, is sort of divided into three elements. The casualty or the liability, work comp, general liability, auto liability.
Hmm.
I and my counterpart, who is on the East Coast, we kind of split the country at the Mississippi River.
Hmm.
I manage most things to the west. He manages most things to the east. I said there's three of us. There's another gentleman who manages our large property consultants.
Gotcha.
But this other person and I, we kind of split the country relative to staffing, management of the activities that we provide to our policyholders. And there's no hard line. I don't stop at the Mississippi River. If I need to go to New York, I go to New York. But
Yeah.
we're great collaborators. We kind of know what's going on. But he and I split the country. We each have a big team. So we're working on helping with business development. We're helping with the assignment of staff to our policyholders. What our service planning model is and that type of thing. Some technical services for sure, but that's kind of what I do day to day. I have policyholders of my own that I manage and work with,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I have a team that I manage, and that's kind of my
Yeah.
day to day job.
Well, this is great. Dan, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I think the viewers are going to enjoy hearing what you've done and the success, one of the many successes I know you have had in your career. So
Mm.
that's awesome, but greatly appreciate it. And thanks for being on. All
James,
right.
thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Same here. Same here.
Okay, take care. My best to everybody.